Welcome to the Michelle Rempel-Garner podcast.
Hello, fellow patriots. Should non-citizens who've been convicted of serious crimes get lighter sentences just because they're non-citizens? And should Canadians be expected to restrict their movements every time there's a crisis? Also on deck today, why did the CBC need to kind of steal the footage of an independent journalist, given that they're given so much tax dollars on an annual basis? And also, big news in terms of canola tariffs and how that potentially could drive Western alienation. We're going to dive right into it today. I'm joined today by veteran political strategist Sean Schnell and my chief of staff, and we're going to start with that first topic. Should non-citizens who've been convicted of serious crimes get lighter sentences just because they're non-citizens? The answer to that question for me, and I think most Canadians, regardless of their political stripe, is no. And this week, I tabled a bill or announced that we will be tabling a bill to correct this problem. And Sean, I think we have a clip from that press conference that we can play.
Yeah, let's give this a listen here.
But removing non-citizens who have been convicted of serious crimes is a no-brainer, and it's one which the Liberals have failed to act upon. By contrast, Conservatives will always fight to protect Canadians, the value of our citizenship, and the safety of every person who lives here. Becoming a Canadian is a privilege, not a right. There we have it. What do you think, Sean? Should non-citizens get lighter sentences?
No, and I think that, like you said, you put it well. I think this is a no-brainer. I actually think most Canadians would probably be surprised to hear that this was actually something that was a consideration as a part of the judicial process. I think most people are probably surprised, and I think that's why you're seeing, by and large, a sort of consistent response to this, which is, yeah, this makes sense. This is something that we should not have as a part of our judicial system. Judges shouldn't be taking this into consideration when they're looking at sentencing. And so I think people are saying, yeah, this is a no-brainer. This is something that they're surprised is in place and shouldn't be, and should be fixed.
So just for people who might not know about this, and Sean, you raise a good point, just a little bit of background. So Canada's Immigration Refugee Protection Act, it has a whole section that lays out the fact that non-citizens who are convicted of serious crimes should be deported. It's actually the law. It's actually what Parliament passed decades ago. But what happened was in 2013, a court ruling came out that said that judges should consider immigration status in sentencing. And it took a few years for that decision to work its way through the judiciary. But in all of that time, the Liberals have not rectified this issue. And now it's becoming normative for lawyers, criminal defense attorneys, etc., to argue that their clients, their non-citizen clients, immigration status should factor into and allow for a lower sentence for really serious crimes. There's many cases. Shout out to Jamie at the National Post for reporting about essentially child luring, sexual assault cases having sentences downgraded by virtue of somebody's immigration status. And that's just, I think the response we received this week was really positive. I've seen a lot of feedback from across political stripe that this bill that we're going to introduce in the fall is a no-brainer.
Yeah, and you're exactly right when you call it a situation where it's creating a two-tier system, because the reality is that if you are not applying the same level of sentencing to individuals, then you are creating a separate system. And so that is what that's by definition what a two-tier system looks like. And I think the other reality here is that it's situations like this that begin to erode public trust and public support for Canada's immigration system. And so we've talked a lot about this on this podcast, and this is another example of the Liberals failing to address what is a pretty basic common sense solution in favor of a different process, a different sort of part of the system, which is, again, eroding public trust in the immigration system. This is a really basic fix that Parliament could address right away. And if the Liberals are serious about tackling immigration issues, if they're serious about tackling crime and justice issues, they should absolutely take this up immediately.
Well, and the fix is simple. It's a one-line change to the criminal code that states that judges cannot consider somebody's immigration status in sentencing. But even though we've seen broad consensus, excellent coverage from people across political stripe, there was one outlet. Sean, guess which news outlet?
I think the listeners could guess as
Guess
well
which news
here.
outlet said, no, this is probably a bad idea. Let's put the headline up there if we have it. Here is the CBC. Here is our nation's far left national broadcaster saying, conservatives say the justice system favors non-citizens. Experts disagree. Now, Sean, I need to rant on this for a second. Can I tell you who the expert was that they cited?
Who was it?
It was a law professor at the University of Toronto who is best known for extensively arguing for Omar Khadr to get money from the Canadian government. And you'll remember Omar Khadr was embroiled and suspected of throwing a grenade that killed a U.S. troops in Afghanistan. And if we've been around a while, so we remember that whole debacle. But that's what this expert, that's what she's best noted for. What do you think? Do you think that the average Canadian would share that opinion?
I think the average Canadian is tired of hearing from the so-called experts on CBC and on the national panels, especially when it comes to situations like this that again are driving sort of common sense solutions that the majority of Canadians can get behind. And so when I saw that, I the first thought I had was, who cares? Honestly,
Yeah,
who
fair
cares?
enough. That's a better reaction than what
Who cares?
she's known for. Who cares?
Like, because the reality is Parliament is the decision maker here. Parliament is
Yeah,
supreme, and if Canadians want fixes to
yeah.
their judicial system, then Parliament can act on it. And so it's tiresome that outlets like the CBC and others continue to trot out these so-called experts and analysts to try and spin public opinion away from these sorts of common sense solutions. I think Canadians are tired of it, and that would be my response: is who cares?
Well, so who cares from the perspective you've suggested? Who cares from the perspective of Parliament is supreme?
Hmm.
Parliament has created laws which states that non-citizens convicted of serious crimes will be removed from the country. That I think is common sense.
Yeah.
But also, who cares from the perspective of CBC when they said experts disagree, did not include any sort of opinion from the families of victims who have had or victims themselves who have had essentially what I think is abrogated justice or diminished justice because of this lack of clarity in the criminal code around sentencing. So for me for the CBC to have an article where they have this one very narrow ivory tower perspective and not look at the fact that, as you stated, Parliament has already passed laws which clearly state that non-citizens convicted of serious crime should be deported, and also no perspective from what about the person who there was one case that I cited in the announcement that they had been their genitals had been groped twice at a bar. The person who did it to them was a non-citizen, was convicted, and that person had their sentence reduced out of consideration for his immigration status. What about the victim
Yeah.
there? Where was
Yeah.
where,
No.
where was her commentary?
Yeah.
Like,
Exactly. Well, you're exactly right. Like, and I just wanted to say, like, that's an important point here. This isn't some hypothetical problem that conservatives
no,
have cooked up over the summer here. There are real case examples
case after
of where
case
this
after case
where
after
this is
case.
being where this is being employed as a part of judicial sentencing. And so this isn't imaginary. This isn't made up. This is a real problem. Canadians understand that it's a real problem. They can see that it's a fairly common sense, simple solution to fix it. it, and Parliament should do it. And now it's up to the Liberals to decide whether they're actually serious about protecting Canadians, protecting their rights in the judicial system and in sentencing, and actually fixing a problem here. I don't have high hopes that they're going to, but they should, because this is a issue that has broad consensus across partisan stripe against all walks of life, and it's a real issue. This isn't imaginary. We have real cases that we can look at to say, here's where this was employed, and this is a problem.
Yeah, and just the lack of balance in the CBC article to me is a direct mirror image of the lack of understanding of the lived reality of a lot of Canadians who are suffering from just a joke of a justice system under the Liberal government. Everything from the Liberals watering down bail requirements, right? The catch and release policies of the Liberals that have resulted in so much crime and so much victimization of so many Canadians. I read that article and I've like, you have got, no, of course it's on brand. It's on brand for them. And it just shows the lack of objectivity. But nonetheless, this isn't about the CBC. This is about the fact that Conservatives, once again, we're doing the job of the Liberal government. This is a no-brainer. We'll be tabling this legislation in the fall, and I hope it just passes quickly. This is something that
It should.
I have been shocked. I know we've gotten a lot of emails in the office over the last couple of days since we announced this, but just people who've been contacting me, not really political people I haven't heard from in a long time, that are like, great job. This is long overdue. Why didn't the Liberals act on this? So that was a big day, and people should stay tuned to this podcast. Click auto download, click subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube, because there's going to be a lot more on this issue that we'll be talking about here, particularly as the House resumes this fall. But Sean, that press conference I gave this week wasn't all about that bill. I made a lot of news for another reason too.
Yes, you did.
And this, of course, was I was asked about the maritime movement restrictions, or I don't want to say bans, but movement restrictions related to the risk of firefighters. And do we have the clip of me talking about that?
Yeah, let's give this a listen here.
Okay. The fear that people experience during wildfire season is something that a lot of Canadians know. You know, I think back to what happened in Jasper National Park last year as an Albertan. And so my hearts are with them and their concern. And also with the firefighters and first responders who put their lives in harm's way during these situations. But I also think about the utter lack of action from the federal government on the issue of forest fires. I think it's four seasons ago now, 4 full wildfire seasons ago, the Liberals promised more water bombers, more firefighters. Where are they? The other thing is that my Conservative colleague Mark Dalton put forward a bill to increase the penalties for people who commit arson that causes a wildfire. So these are both measures that could have prevented and contained wildfire, and the Liberals have done nothing. So wait, my concern is this. Whenever there's a major crisis, what the Liberal government has done by their inaction has conditioned Canadians to expect that the only response they can see out of their federal government is to restrict their movement. And again, I understand that I understand the fear and concern of people in the Maritimes right now, but that the only response they get from their federal government is a tacit, well, I guess you're going to have to restrict your movement. That's not right. So, you know, today we're calling upon the federal government to actually get serious about this issue, pass our bill, put forward the resources that they promised so that Canadians aren't put into this situation. I see this as a lack of responsibility on the federal government. It's an important topic, right? Sean, I watched one particular analyst kind of just give this, look, I have time for him, but like it was an unhinged response to people who were raising concerns about the only seeming response to a crisis being a restriction of movement. And I think it is really important for Canadians to understand that I'm just going to say it. Much like the pandemic, right? Before COVID happened, the government had gutted their pandemic data detection system. The healthcare system across Canada has arguably gotten worse since the pandemic, and Canadians were told to restrict their movement so as not to place strain on the healthcare system. And the federal government hasn't done a lot in that regard. In fact, even immigration, they've juiced immigration numbers and put more strain on the healthcare system. I shudder to think what would happen if there was a major pandemic today. And so, I just want to reemphasize, I really feel for provincial governments. I feel for the people of the Maritimes. I know what you and I know what it's like to be in the middle of a wildfire season, to have that risk, that fire happening right next door to you, to be worried about property, the lives of first responders. I just think that if it's all about restricting movement and it's not about delivering on prevention techniques, then what are we doing? And I'll just close with this. We had a bill in front of Parliament that would have made it a serious criminal offense to start a wildfire or commit arson that resulted in a wildfire, and the Liberals
Hmm.
did nothing with it. And the fact that today we're putting the response, the silence from the federal government on the fact that the provincial governments feel like they have to restrict the movement of people, when the federal government should have been penalizing and discouraging arson, like as one example, or they haven't delivered on water bombers or whatnot.
Yeah.
I encourage people to, um, particularly those who, there needs to be some common sense here, right?
Well, and I
At
think
a bare
there
minimum.
needs to be some accountability as well here too, right?
Yes.
Is where we're talking about a situation here that the Liberal government it has been in power for a decade, and they have
Yeah.
made decisions during that period of time which have created results. And so the result of their decision or lack of decision making is where we find ourselves here today. And I don't think that you would find even Mark Carney or any of the Liberals saying, well, we're completely powerless in this situation. We
Yeah.
have no ability to affect change here. No, that would be ridiculous. Nobody is saying that. And so if they're not completely powerless, then they have some level of
Yeah.
responsibility for the
Of course
situation
they
that
have
we find ourselves
responsibility.
in here. And then I thought your response to this was very, very measured, as opposed to, like you were referencing there, some of the response that we've seen from some of the commentary and people online about this has been absolutely unhinged. And my response to this is, when you are restricting the freedom, when you're restricting the movement of Canadians, then that is open for debate and discussion. If that's a
Yes.
decision that you're making as a government, then I'm
Yes.
sorry, that's on the table for
Yes.
discussion. When you are impacting the freedom of Canadians, and that's a decision that you made, then go and back it up. Go and sell it to the public. But I'm sorry, we're allowed to debate and discuss it as well too. And don't
Yeah.
lose your mind when Canadians come out and say, well, we don't like this, and we want to have a discussion about this.
Well,
That is fair game. That is
and
part of
don't
being accountable as a government.
and don't assume or imply, even worse, that people who dare ask a question like, is this the best public policy intervention, are rubes or quote rednecks,
Oh,
right?
the name calling is unbelievable.
But it's a classic debate fallacy, right? It's the
Hmm.
ad hominem attack. It's the vilification of somebody who dares to ask a constructive question, right? And the reason in a democracy why we don't devolve into, forms of violence is because we're supposed to be able to talk differences out, or question things, or question public policy. In fact, the best public policy happens when you do have lively debate, right? And
100%.
I would think that the federal government in particular has a lot of trust rebuilding to undertake, particularly after the pandemic, after after scandal, where Canadians were basically, it was implied that they were somehow mentally deficient if they dared question the public, or the public policy decisions of the federal government. And that has to stop. For the sake of Canada's democracy, these debates have to be allowed to constructively happen without having, major pundits who have led national campaigns like respectfully call people names for asking constructive questions or say that they somehow don't care. Of course, I care. You care about people in the maritime. We have very close friends who have lived through previous fire seasons who I know and I feel their fear. And they don't want to lose their homes. They don't want their family who are water bombers or who are flying water bombers or going to fight these fires to be in harm's way. They don't want to lose their property or their homes. It is unbelievable that we are being told by some people that it's somehow wrong for us to say, how did we get to this situation to begin with? I'm not talking about the provincial government here, to be very clear to
Mhm.
to Premier Houston. I am talking about the overall conditions for debate on why the first response after decades of like a decade of inaction from this Liberal government should immediately be that's the first and only resort that sometimes provincial governments have to rely on is restriction of movement. Like so I think, Sean, for me, the reaction from the public on this that nobody has really talked about is this is still the federal government not addressing the mistakes that were made during the pandemic. We
Yeah,
haven't.
I agree.
I'm sorry. I have to finish this rant. This
No, I
is
agree
my
with you.
therapy.
Yeah.
This is my therapy for the week. They gave Theresa Tam the Order of Canada after she flip-flopped on all sorts of public health advice, said some arguably crazy things. Like, remember that I think there was something about like having sex with a mask on at the same time, or like I think there was stuff about glory holes from some public health agency. Like just, and then the Canadian government flip-flopped on the AstraZeneca advice. And like these are decisions that erode public trust. The decision to use the Emergencies Act regardless of how you feel about the trucker convoy, was obviously wrong in that situation. You had two ministers who are now senior advisors to Mark Carney muse about
Mhm.
using tanks on the Canadian people. So of course people were so close to that decision and the government has done nothing to restore public trust. And just then to have people who are affiliated with that party go online and just I think they know who I'm talking about here. Do
Well,
better.
yeah. Yeah.
Do better.
Well,
We can have
yeah,
these
I agree.
disagreements, but don't call people names for asking questions.
Well, and this is the reality of it, and I agree with you 100% as far as how you're contextualizing this is the decisions that were made during the COVID lockdowns and restrictions and all of that had a cost. There was a
Yes.
cost to those
A lot of
decisions
cost.
that were made, both financially, but also as a society. And for people to pretend and now expect that all came free, that there wasn't going to be some sort of reaction, long lasting reaction within the Canadian public, are just mistaken. It's that's just not the reality. And so when governments, when the Liberals and Mark Carney come out and operate in an environment as if nothing has changed, nothing they have done has had any sort of impact on people, that's where people get their backs up. And that's where people get frustrated because they see more of the same, just a continuation of what has happened over the last number of years. And so then they get frustrated. And then you roll people out into the
Yeah.
media to try and spin and try and name call and try and tamp down on any discussion and debate. And that's where people then they really get frustrated about it, and they begin to say, well, no, like this is unreasonable, and you actually lose the ability to have a discussion and a debate. So I come back
Yeah.
to that point of saying government policy, when you put it on the table, especially when you're impacting freedom, when you're impacting people's daily lives in a dramatic way like this, it's up for discussion, it's up for debate. And you can't have people going out there and calling them crackpots and all sorts of names just because they want to have a discussion about this.
Or
That's
assuming
that's the job.
or assuming that people don't care about the situation and don't want a solution, right? It's this siloing of like this rigid silo. It's like this assumption or trying to say that there's not a Venn diagram of people who are asking about questions of is is this the best public policy option? Is like what is the cost here that they don't overlap with the people who need immediate public policy relief, right? Whose lives are in danger. Like the division of people along the lines of, oh my God, they're asking a question versus, we need to have results. That undermines Canadian democracy. We have to be able to facilitate that debate. So
That's
um,
leadership. Like that's the
it's
whole role
leadership.
of leadership.
So at the end of this week, like, I'm concerned watching that play out this week. I not, again, sympathy, love, respect, solidarity with people of the Maritimes as they deal with this situation. It is a difficult one. We've lived through it in Alberta, other parts of the country are too.
Hmm.
Pundits who are ratcheting this up, calling people names, who are asking questions, don't do that anymore. It undermines Canadian democracy. Should we
I
talk
agree.
about should we talk about the CBC stealing Jasmine Lane's big get this week?
Yes,
Maybe
on the
stealing isn't
topic
like the right word, so
on the
I'll walk
topic of
that back.
media.
But the CBC used Jasmine Lane's footage. So let's explain what happened here. So Jasmine Lane is an independent podcaster, sort of a pundit, I guess, on different social media platforms. She puts a lot of content out, and she had a big get this week, huge get. She had the ambassador from the United States to Canada on her show, so like huge interview. He made some really like newsworthy comments. And so the particular comment in question here is he said to her that the Canada-US free trade agreement, elements of it or in its entirety, are in jeopardy. And the funny thing was, it's the CBC put it up on their newscast. Or I think it was one of their political pundit shows that's always very left wing. And I got such a I just wanted to give a shout out to Jasmine, and I'm going to say this, and all the other independent media who are living the dream, because you've got the CBC, who is the recipient of, hundreds of millions, over $1 billion of tax dollars. They're executives with wild bonuses. They're allowed to advertise still under these situations and compete for advertising dollars. They are protected through censorship bills like C-18 and C-11 that the Liberals passed to protect them. They are wildly left-wing and non-objective, and they even entrench that in their operating principles. And here you've got a plucky independent journalist who not only didn't have any of those benefits, but is succeeding in spite of that, having a huge get. And for me, it's a little spark of hope. We often have bad news on this podcast, but I was like, what a huge get this week. And to have the national broadcaster borrow that footage, it shows that there is a value and a need for independent journalism. So for all of our friends out there, and people who are on the left as well, who are independent journalists, this is what we need in Canada. Is we need more independent journalism. We need more people who are pushing beyond the censorship bans that the Liberals have put in place to restrict people's voices and get the word out. So very interesting. That was really wild to see.
Yeah, no, good for Jasmine, like you said, good for independent journalists and outlets that are out there that are not only reporting the news, but they're actually making news as
Yes.
they get these sorts of interviews and get this information out to Canadians. And again, it's another reminder for folks to make sure that they are going out, subscribing, finding these outlets and individuals that they're following them, and making sure that they are getting this information directly, because as we've talked about lots, there's news bans, there's censorship laws in place here in Canada that are making it more difficult to get information out to Canadians. And so this was great for Jasmine and great for Canadians to be able to get this sort of information.
Well, it sort of underscores why you and I do this podcast, why I write my Substack, why we tell people to subscribe and auto download. You go back to that Torque CBC story that we talked about on the front end around my bill. When you've got the nation's major broadcaster, it's so clearly biased to the left. We have to have other platforms to get our voice out and be heard. And it's nice to be able to use platforms like Spotify, like Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Substack, etc., and have an audience there. So thank you to subscribers on that. And if Jasmine's listening to this, keep going. Let's talk about the canola tariff that happened this week. So massive tariff imposed on Canada by China. A 75.8% tariff on Canadian canola impacts, which will canola imports which will have a major impact on Western Canadian canola growers. Do you have this tweet that we can show? Just what this shows here. So you and I actually fact checked these numbers, and they're pretty close, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the dairy industry in Canada, its contribution to the GDP on an annual basis is $20 billion, and the canola industry is $43 billion. So both important industries. Dairy industry is obviously important to the country. But there's been so much discussion about dairy vis-a-vis tariffs, as there should be. Crickets from Mark Carney on a devastating tariff on canola, which, and I'm just going to say it, I don't think he cares, because it's Western Canada, and it mostly produces Western Canadian producers. And I want to thank Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre for taking a super strong stance on this week, calling for action, specific action from Mark Carney and the Liberal government. Mark Carney's I think he's on holidays right now, hasn't said a word about these tariffs, as well as the premiers like Scott Moe, who have called for action as well. But I'm going to say, I'm not saying one is more important than the other or whatnot, but like, if this had been the dairy industry, there would have been probably a premiers conference somewhere immediately called. Why should Western Canadian farmers be left out? So kudos to Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre for recognizing that all Canadian industries need a better deal. And I know that you have some thoughts on Mark Carney's ability to get deals done.
Yeah, well, I do. And I think that this is another example of how Mark Carney and the Liberals are failing Canadians. And I think this, again, it's a question of leadership and a question of accountability. And I agree with you that Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre was out. He was out strong on this, talking about this unjustified tariff now that China has imposed, and has been talking about the tariff issues from the beginning. And here is just a bit of a recap. This is just a short list.
It's a sad
Yeah,
laugh.
this is the ugly truth of the reality of the Liberal Party and Mark Carney right now. And you see, he twice missed the deadline, his own deadline for the Canada-US deal. U.S. has doubled existing tariffs, added new ones while giving extensions to other countries. China's now hit us with a 75% tariff on canola. Carney backed down on the digital sales tax. Mexico has snubbed the Canadian ministers on a bilateral deal. Europe has agreed to a U.S. energy deal, zero for Canadians. The ugly truth is Carney is losing. And this is not what was promised to Canadians. If they remember, I want to throw this up in Mark Carney's own words. He said, Canada didn't ask for this fight, but in a trade war, much like in hockey, we will win. And
doesn't look like winning, boss.
That's what I say. My question to Canada is, are you tired of winning yet? Does it feel like you're winning on anything here yet? And it is. It's like you have to laugh, because it's just you shake your head at just the hypocrisy of it. But it's a real impact on Canadians, on Canadian farmers and families, and this is jobs that are going to be impacted by this. And the Liberals are nowhere. And not only are they nowhere, it is getting worse. And so again, I come back to this. This is sort of my word of the day here, is just this accountability. Is they are in charge. This is their economy. They have been in power for a decade now. And so all of this is coming home to roost now for the country, and they cannot wash their hands of this. This is them. This is their decisions, and they own this. And so it is a really dire situation for agriculture producers here in Western Canada. But the real question, yet, like you said, remains: where is Mark Carney on this, and what is he going to do? Because he can't just continue to do photo ops. You actually have to do the job of prime minister. At some point here, you actually have to do something.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's right to point out that every region of the country deserves attention to their industry by its federal government. And the one that often gets the short end of the stick is Western Canadian industries, be it oil and gas, punitive policies against our energy industry by the Liberal government. And now this canola issue where the Liberals are nowhere on it. And to go through an entire federal election campaign of, under the theme of Team Canada, okay, that's important. Team Canada is good. You can't ignore a tariff on a giant Canadian industry that just because, and to me, it looks like this. I think he's not saying anything. He's, well, whatever. It's Saskatchewan and Alberta. Who cares? I hope he proves me otherwise. But in the meantime, it's been Pierre Poilievre who's been out saying things like, why is the federal government giving money to major contracts like the shipbuilding contract in BC to a Chinese company when they're imposing these types of tariffs on us? Where's the response? Why is this happening? So yeah, I think you're right, Sean, to point out that there hasn't been a lot of wins there, but I think it's also just to encourage listeners. Our federal party leader has been out this week on that issue. He's out last week talking about motions that we're going to undertake in the fall to bolster Canada's economy and force the Liberals to ensure that we get some wins. And again, this week, it was a busy week in Ottawa, getting ready for fall session, announcing bills, and Conservatives are working hard, even if, do you notice they didn't even put the Liberal immigration minister once this summer? She hasn't been out at all. Anyway.
No, yeah, the Liberals, they haven't been out on anything.
Crickets.
So I agree with you. Like I hope they prove us wrong, because I hope he can get some traction on this, because that's good for the country. But I mean, you're right. Like they're nowhere on this, and it's like you guys had the job, you wanted the job, you got the job, do the job, get to work.
Get to work, and we're going to force them to make sure that they get to work. And that's what you and I have been busy on, and we're going to keep fighting for our constituents and everybody listening to this podcast. So one more reminder, folks, lots more updates to come, especially as we start getting into the pre-fall session window. It's sort of starting this week already. Click auto download, click subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube, on Facebook. We will be coming to you. Even if the CBC won't, who knows, Sean, maybe the CBC will borrow footage from this podcast too.
There you go.
Working hard for you. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening. If you want even more political news, subscribe at michellerempelgarner.substack.com. And if you like what you hear, be sure to share this podcast.